Are you sick and tired of groceries being too deadgum expensive? Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite part of economics, inflation. So inflation is something that if you look in the news recently, you'll see it thrown around all over the place. Inflation here, inflation there, inflation. But does anyone actually know what it means? In today's episode, we're going to be talking about what inflation is, a couple of things that cause inflation, and why it's important to understand what inflation actually is. Let's get into it. So before we can understand what inflation is, we have to understand, well, what it is. So the basic and most commonly accepted definition of inflation is the increase of prices over a given time. But this can also go under another, more easier to explain definition of just buying power. So inflation has everything to do with how much you can buy with the money that you have. If your dollar or whatever piece of currency you use is very strong, then you can afford more things with that strong dollar or currency. If your currency is really weak, then it takes more of that money for you to buy certain things. And that's basically inflation. Inflation is that rise and lowering of prices over any given time, and it has everything to do with the economy. Inflation is really important, and if you don't get inflation under control, you have a lot of price issues, both either being too expensive or maybe not expensive enough, that can really negatively affect an economy. No matter what kind of economy that you have, whether it be a capitalist, socialist, communist, whatever, any type of economy that involves money, you're going to have a level of inflation. Here in the United States, we have a target rate of inflation being at 2%. That is what we want our inflation to be at a yearly rate. We consider that okay or good inflation. Currently here in the United States, though, we have an inflation rate of about 4.9%, which is down significantly from 8.26% it was last year, which caused a lot of economic problems if you remember just how expensive things were and still continue to be. We are seeing a drop in that inflation, but inflation for the United States is still considered high by our standards. So now that we have a basic understanding of what inflation is and how it relates to the United States, let's talk about a little bit of how a country gets to high levels of inflation and in a few areas of where inflation comes from. So let's look at inflation explained. So there are a wide variety of reasons why inflation happens, why it continues to go up, what lowers it, what raises it, but we're going to look at three main causes for inflation, especially here in 2023. The first one being increase in money supply. Now, contrary to popular belief, you'll see a lot of political institutions that say, or just people who don't know what they're talking about, will say, hey, let's just print more money, that'll solve the issue. Well, actually, that can make the problem worse. Printing more money is not the way to solve this problem, because inflation and your economy is all relative to the amount of money an economy has on hand. So let's take a look at the United States, for example. We have the number one economy in the world. We have a GDP, or gross domestic product, of $27 trillion, and we are number one when it comes to a strong economy. Now, because we are a much bigger economy, we actually have more room to print more money, but it has to be relative to two things. One, how much money is already circulating throughout the United States, and two, how much we have in terms of GDP. So technically, yes, we could print more money. However, if we go above what is relative to our economy, then we can actually make inflation worse. Back a few years ago, rewind a little bit, when Russia and Ukraine were starting to go after each other and Russia's economy collapsed, is because people pulled out of a lot of economic deals. They no longer had a whole lot of money circulating, and they tried to print more money, which caused inflation to be even worse for the country of Russia. Increase in money supply isn't necessarily the best idea for having or controlling inflation in and of itself. A second cause for inflation is supply chain disruption. So in any type of economy, it does not matter what kind of economy, if it is capitalist, if it is socialist, if it is command, free market, traditional, it doesn't matter. If there is any type of economic system, you have to follow the rules of supply and demand. Now in this video, I'm not going to get into the law of supply and demand, but I will talk about it in a later video because it is important to understand, and it can be very confusing. But let's talk about supply chain disruption and how that affects inflation. So again, the law of supply and demand is a very core tenet of any type of economic system. However, if a supply chain is interrupted, disrupted, moved around, or completely gotten rid of, and the demand for that supply or that product stays the same, that can also drive up prices, which drive up inflation. So again, referencing the war in Ukraine, I'm only referencing it so much is because Ukraine and Russia have a huge market on wheat products. Anything that involves bread or barley or wheat or any of those type of products, Russia and Ukraine combined control about 33% of the world's grain production. So when they started fighting each other, they disrupted basically the wheat market, at least a third of the wheat market. So now places like Europe and the United States and possibly places in Asia had to find a different place to get their wheat, which caused prices in wheat products to go up, and barley things as well. So basically alcohol, bread, anything of that nature that involved that type of wheat and barley, you saw an increase in prices. So when a supply chain is completely cut in half or gone or moved around, you're going to see an increase in prices of that specific supply or product. The same thing happened with chips. During the COVID years, there was a disruption in the supply chain for computer chips, which made technology, gaming consoles, computers, tablets, televisions, and even some parts for cars, made it really hard to come by and made it really expensive to make and buy those products. And you saw a huge increase in prices for a lot of those goods or services that use that technology. The last piece of what causes inflation that we're going to look at today is consumer demand increase. So in a capitalist society specifically, consumer demand means everything in that capitalist economy. If you do not have the free markets, if people are not determining what is the best product and consuming those products, then it doesn't work. However, there becomes a problem when, much like supply chain disruption, if there's an increased demand for a product or a supply that is just not there, prices are going to go up as well. In a later video, when I actually discuss the law of supply and demand, we actually get into about how supply and demand, whether it's higher or lower for either, affect the prices of certain goods, services, or products. If there's too much demand and there's not enough supply, inflation will drive up prices. Yes, people really want them, but if they have to spend more money to get those products that they need to make their products, then that is going to drive up prices onto the consumer for those goods, which kind of hurts everybody. Companies have to spend more money to get the things to make the products, which also then they push those costs onto the consumer, who have to pay more stuff for things that they want, and it hurts their wallet and bank account as well. Hope you got the information you were looking for, a kind of a brief overview of inflation itself and some of its causes. In a later video, we will discuss the laws of supply and demand and how that also affects prices here, not just in the United States, but on a global economy as well. If you liked what you see, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and also smash that bell icon and get notified every time I upload a new video. I hope to see you in the next video. I hope you have a great and fantastic day, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.